I betrayed my husband, lost my lover, and was forced to west saintful wreckage of my life to enemy city. I betrayed my husband, but I didn't want to. When he caught me and broke up with me, my lover also left me, and I had to move to another city. So the sound of the water hitting the tiles echoed through the bathroom as Lydia Stevens stood under the shower, letting the warmth cascade over her skin. She closed her eyes, allowing the droplets to wash away the remnants of her evening with Jake Turner. It had been an intense night, one that blurred the lines between professional and personal. Jake wasn't just her boss anymore. He had become something more, someone who stirred feelings she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until that night. So Lydia had finally surrendered the last part of herself she had been keeping hidden, accompanied by a confession of emotions she never intended to voice. It wasn't a decision she had made lightly. Initially, Lydia had been filled with guilt and nervous anticipation. She had never considered herself the kind of person to cross that line, to betray her marriage vows, but now, as the water ran over her, she found that the weight of the experience wasn't as unbearable as she had feared. Her thoughts drifted back to her husband, Todd, a man she had been married to for nearly 22 years. Todd had never asked for certain parts of her, parts that Jake seemed to naturally unlock. It was a new and frightening revelation, one she couldn't fully comprehend. Was she compartmentalizing her feelings, reserving different aspects of herself for different men? Lydia couldn't remember a time when she had considered infidelity, and yet, here she was, questioning if there was any part of her left that was still solely for Todd. She had spent years committed to him, devoted to their life together. But as the steam rose around her, she began to wonder if she had slowly drifted away without even realizing it. For years, Lydia had worked at a large investment firm, Delaney Company, a place where power and discretion were key elements of the corporate culture. The executives were all men, and while it wasn't official, there was an unwritten rule at the firm that every senior executive would establish some kind of relationship with their personal assistant. It was a long-standing tradition, one that had been quietly maintained for over 5 decades. Every assistant signed a non-disclosure agreement, ensuring the firm's private practices stayed hidden from the outside world. For many, this relationship wasn't just professional. Some of the assistants, like Lydia, were married, while others were single, but all of them were expected to comply with the culture that Delaney Company upheld. For most of her career, Lydia had managed to avoid that part of the firm's unsaid policies. She had worked with other executives before Jake, always maintaining a strict professional boundary. But Jake Turner had changed things. He had joined the company from a prestigious firm in Los Angeles, and from the moment Lydia was temporarily assigned to him, there was something different. He didn't fit the mold of the usual executives. He was sharp, ambitious, but also kind in a way that caught her off guard. So Lydia had made it clear from the start that she had no interest in being anything other than his assistant. "I'm only your PA until you choose someone permanent," she had said during their first meeting. "So there are plenty of other young women here who would be more than eager to take on the role full-time." "I don't want any of them," Jake had replied, his voice calm but resolute. "I want you, Lydia. You're smart, you're talented, and you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met." "Jake, I'm married," Lydia had reminded him, her voice firm. "Happily married. I have a family." "I'm 44, for God's sake. You could choose someone younger, someone who doesn't have the commitments I do." "You may be 44, Jake had said, his eyes locking onto hers, "but you don't look it. You're incredible. I won't ask for anything beyond a professional relationship if that's what you want. But I'm choosing you." The allure of the opportunity was undeniable. The firm offered generous bonuses to its PAs, $60,000 every 6 months, in addition to a significant salary increase. Lydia had hesitated, knowing that accepting the role came with unspoken expectations. But the money was too good to turn down. She and Todd had been struggling financially ever since Todd's business went under a few years ago, and the thought of finally easing some of that burden was hard to resist. "Okay, Jake," she had said after a long pause, "we can give it a try, but I need you to understand that my marriage is not up for negotiation." Many of her colleagues had been shocked when Jake made his decision, and a few had even voiced their surprise. "So why Lydia?" they had wondered. What made her so special? But she didn't let their curiosity or thinly veiled jealousy affect her. She had a job to do, and at first she had stuck to her principles. For the first few months, her meetings with Jake were professional. So they met 3 times a week during the company's designated PA hours, a routine that was part of the firm's secretive structure. Unlike other executives who blurred the lines between work and personal relationships, Jake and Lydia sat in his office, discussing everything from company matters to her family life. One day, Jake had asked her about Todd, his tone casual but interested. "Tell me about your husband." "His name's Todd," she had said, her voice softening at the mention of her husband. He used to run his own construction company, but after the recession hit, he had to shut it down. Now he does freelance work, mainly helping out with small projects around town. And how's he doing with that? Isliks tisnan is najiklikistim. Her words tinged with a hint of sadness. It's been hard on him. Losing the business took a lot out of him, but he's doing the best he can. He spends most of his time at home now, taking care of things around the house when he's not working. Jake had nodded thoughtfully. He sounds like a good man. He is, Lydia had said, her voice filled with affection. We've been through a lot together. Despite her love for Todd, Lydia had begun to feel a growing sense of distance between them. So their marriage, once filled with passion and excitement, had settled into a routine of comfortable familiarity. They still loved each other, but the spark that had once defined their relationship had dimmed over the years. It wasn't long before Jake's interest in Lydia went beyond their professional relationship. He admired her intelligence, her dedication, and her beauty. Over time, their conversations grew more personal, more intimate. Lydia found herself confiding in Jake in ways she hadn't with Todd in years, and Jake, for his part, was persistent. He didn't push her, but he made his feelings clear. I don't just want you as my assistant, Lydia, he had said when he had his bed. They had spent hours talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams. I want more. So I can't do this, Jake, Lydia had said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I'm married. I can't betray Todd. I'm not asking you to leave him, Jake had replied, his voice gentle but firm. But there's something between us, Lydia. You can't deny that. So I feel it, and I know you do too. Lydia had resisted for months, determined to keep their relationship professional. To one evening, as they sat in Jake's office long after everyone else had gone home, something shifted. The tension that had been building between them finally broke. Jake had leaned in, his hand brushing against her cheek, and before she could stop herself, she had kissed him. From that moment, everything changed. So the affair had started slowly. At first, it was just the occasional stolen moment in his office, an embrace, a kiss. But as the weeks passed, their encounters grew more intense, more passionate. Jake was younger than Todd, more energetic, and he made Lydia feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But with every encounter, the guilt weighed heavier on her. She had never intended to cheat on Todd, never imagined herself capable of such betrayal. Yet here she was, living a double life, hiding her affair with Jake while trying to maintain the facade of a happy marriage. Lydia tried to convince herself that what she and Jake had was separate from her marriage to Todd, that it didn't change the love she felt for her husband. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Every time she left Jake's office and returned home to Todd, she felt a pang of guilt that she couldn't shake. She had become good at hiding the affair. She always made sure to shower before going home, using the same soap and shampoo she used at home, so Todd wouldn't notice anything different. She made sure their meetings stayed within the confines of the office or at Jake's apartment. She told Todd that her late nights at work were due to deadlines and new projects, and he had never questioned her. After all, she had never given him a reason to doubt her before. But things had started to unravel when Todd became more withdrawn. Lydia noticed he wasn't as enthusiastic about the new truck she had bought him with her bonus. So he drove it less and less, opting instead for his old, beat-up pickup. The one evening she asked him about it. Why don't you drive the new truck anymore? I'm trying to keep the mileage down, Todd had replied, his voice distant, but Lydia knew there was more to it. Todd, is everything okay? She had asked, her concern growing. You've been quiet lately. I'm worried about you. It's nothing, Todd had said, brushing her off. Just work stuff. But Lydia had seen the change in him. He was more withdrawn, more irritable. Something was bothering him, but he wouldn't talk about it. She suspected he might be dealing with something related to the private investigation work he did for his friend Mike, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Then, one day, Todd came home with a look on his face that Lydia couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, exactly, but there was a hardness in his expression that unsettled her. So Lydia, we need to talk, he had said, his voice steady but firm. Her heart had skipped a beat. What is it? She had asked, trying to keep her voice calm. I know about you and Jake, Todd had said, his eyes locking onto hers. Lydia's world had shattered in that moment. She had tried to deny it, to explain it away, but Todd had been prepared. He had evidence, audio recordings, surveillance footage, things she hadn't even known he had access to. There was no point in lying. Todd, I'm sorry, she had said, tears streaming down her face. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, please, we can fix this. But Todd had shaken his head. No, Lydia, you made your choice. And that had been the end of it. Todd filed for divorce soon after, and Lydia's world crumbled around her. Jake, sensing the tension and the fallout, had distanced himself, leaving Lydia to deal with the wreckage of her life. The affair had cost her everything: her marriage, her family, her sense of self. So now, as Lydia stood in the shower, letting the water wash over her, she wondered how things had gone so wrong. How had she let herself fall sour? There were no easy answers. Lydia stood in the doorway of her now quiet home, staring at the boxes that lined the walls. Todd's things were gone. The house they had shared for 2 decades felt alien to her, like it wasn't hers anymore. Every corner, every room, carried a memory of their life together. Pressed down on her as she moved through the house, trying to process how she had lost everything that mattered. It had been a month since Todd had left, but the shock of the divorce papers still clung to Lydia like a heavy fog. So the affair with Jake had been a reckless act of desperation, a foolish attempt to fill a void she hadn't even realized existed. She had never meant for it to go this far, never imagined that it would destroy her marriage, her family. But the damage was done, and there was no going back. Todd had been kind, despite everything. He hadn't yelled or lashed out when he found out about the affair. Instead, he had been calm, distant, that hurt more than anything. So the realization that Todd had quietly accepted the betrayal, without so much as a fight, had left Lydia feeling hollow. Their last conversation replayed in her mind, haunting her with its finality. "I don't hate you, Lydia," Todd had said as they sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers between them, "but I can't stay in this marriage. Not after this." Lydia had pleaded with him, begging for a second chance. But Todd's resolve had been unshakable. He had given her the house, split their savings, and left with little more than his clothes and a few personal belongings. The man who had once been her entire world had walked out of her life without looking back. And Jake? He was gone too. After Todd had confronted her, Jake had distanced himself. So the passionate affair that had once consumed them had fizzled out, replaced by awkward silences and avoidance. It hadn't taken long for Jake to move on, finding another woman to charm. Lydia had become just another chapter in his long history of entanglements with women at work. She had been foolish to think she was any different. As the weeks dragged on, Lydia sank into a deep depression. She struggled to get out of bed in the mornings, dreading the emptiness that awaited her in the house. Her job at Delaney Company felt like a constant reminder of her failure. Everywhere she looked, she saw traces of her affair with Jake. The office, the conference room where they had first kissed, the late nights in his apartment. It was suffocating. She knew she couldn't stay there much longer. But leaving Delaney Company felt like admitting defeat, like giving up the last piece of control she had over her life. So she stayed, going through the motions, hoping that one day the weight of her guilt and regret would lift. It didn't. One evening, after another long day at the office, Lydia returned home to find a letter in her mailbox. The return address was unfamiliar, but when she opened it, her heart stopped. It was from Todd. Lydia sat down on the couch, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter. "Lydia, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened between us, and I wanted to write this letter to clear the air. I know we talked when I left, but I feel like there are still things left unsaid, things I need to say for my own peace of mind. First of all, I don't blame you entirely for what happened. I know that might sound strange, but it's true. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We both made mistakes along the way, and I think I failed you in a lot of ways. I wasn't always as present as I should have been. I let the stress of losing my business and everything that came with it get in the way of being a good husband. I thought I was doing enough by just being there, but I realize now that I wasn't really there in the ways that mattered. That doesn't excuse what you did, the affair with Jake. God, it hurt. I can't pretend it didn't, but I understand why it happened. You were looking for something that I wasn't giving you, and you found it in someone else. I can't change that, and I don't know if I would have been able to even if I had tried. But here's the thing, Lydia, I don't hate you for it. I don't even think I'm angry anymore. I just feel sad. Sad that our marriage ended the way it did. Sad that we couldn't fix what was broken. Sad that we didn't get a second chance. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I hope you find some peace. I hope you find happiness again, even if it's not with me. We both deserve that, I think. Take care of yourself, Todd." Lydia read the letter 3 times before the tears came. She had been holding them back for so long, trying to stay strong, but Todd's words broke through the dam she had built around her heart. She sobbed, clutching the letter to her chest, feeling the full weight of her grief and regret. Todd didn't hate her. He didn't even seem angry. But the fact that he had moved on, that he had found a way to forgive her when she couldn't even forgive herself, left her feeling more lost than ever. For hours, Lydia sat on the couch, staring at the letter, unsure of what to do next. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, stuck in a cycle of self-pity and guilt. She needed to make a change. But where to start? She had spent the night thinking about Todd's letter, about the mistakes she had made, and about the life she wanted to rebuild. Staying at Delaney Company was no longer an option. The job, once a source of pride, had become a constant reminder of her affair with Jake and the life she had destroyed. She needed to leave to start fresh somewhere else. Lydia called her boss, informed him of her decision to resign, and began the process of closing that chapter of her life. It wasn't easy. Delaney Company had been her career for years, but she knew it was the right decision. Staying there would only keep her trapped in the past, reliving the worst mistakes she had ever made. So once her resignation was finalized, Lydia felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her life again. She wasn't sure what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't stay in the town she and Todd had shared for so long. Everywhere she looked, she saw memories of their life together. Lydia packed up her car and left the house behind. She didn't know where she was going. She just drove, heading west with no real destination in mind. She needed space, time to think, time to heal. She needed to rediscover who she was without Todd, without Jake, without the life she had built around her identity as a wife and a career woman. As she drove through the countryside, the rolling hills and open fields stretching out before her, Lydia began to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was what she needed. A fresh start. A new beginning. Weeks passed as Lydia traveled across the country, staying in small motels, exploring towns she had never been to before. The long drives and quiet evenings gave her plenty of time to reflect on her life, on the choices she had made, and on the person she wanted to become. She kept a journal, writing down her thoughts and feelings, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. One afternoon, while passing through a small coastal town in Oregon, Lydia decided to stop for lunch at a cafe near the beach. It was a quiet, unassuming place, with only a few locals seated at the tables. A sense of calm settled over her. For the first time in months, Lydia didn't feel like she was running away from something. She wasn't trying to escape her past or drown her guilt in distractions. She was just existing, and it felt good. As she finished her meal, Lydia noticed a help wanted sign in the window of the cafe. She had no intention of staying in the town for long, but something about the sign caught her attention. Maybe this was what she needed, a temporary job, something simple and unconnected to her old life, just to help her get back on her feet. On a whim, Lydia approached the counter and asked the waitress about the job. "We're looking for someone to help with serving tables and working the counter," the waitress explained. "It's not glamorous, but it's a steady gig. Are you interested?" Lydia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." The waitress handed her an application, and within an hour, Lydia found herself hired. It wasn't what she had imagined for herself, but it felt like a step in the right direction, a step toward rebuilding her life. The weeks turned into months, and before Lydia knew it, she had settled into a routine in the small coastal town. The cafe job wasn't glamorous, but it was a welcome change from the corporate world she had left behind. The simple tasks, taking orders, serving food, chatting with the regulars, gave her a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in a long time. She rented a small cottage near the beach, and in the evenings, she would walk along the shoreline, letting the sound of the waves soothe her restless mind. So the town was quiet, and the people were friendly, but more importantly, no one knew her story. So no one knew about her affair with Jake, or her divorce from Todd, or the life she had left behind. Here she was just Lydia, the woman who worked at the cafe and lived in the cottage by the sea. Slowly but surely, Lydia began to heal. The weight of her guilt and regret started to lift, and she found herself smiling more often, laughing with her co-workers, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. She wasn't fully healed. She knew that would take time, but she was on her way. One evening, as Lydia sat on the beach watching the sunset, she thought about Todd's letter again. She hadn't heard from him since, but she knew he was out there, living his life. She wondered if he had found happiness, if he had moved on. Part of her hoped he had. He deserved it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lydia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had made mistakes, big ones, but she was learning from them, and she was learning to forgive herself. The journey wasn't over, but Lydia knew she was on the right path, and for now, that was enough. Lydia's life in the coastal town had settled into a routine that felt both comforting and strange in its simplicity. She had come to appreciate the slower pace, the lack of constant pressure, and the freedom from her past. The cafe job, though not intellectually demanding, provided structure and, more importantly, a sense of purpose. The townspeople had accepted her as one of their own, and it wasn't long before she was known on a first-name basis by many of the regulars. In their eyes, she was just Lydia, the quiet woman who worked at the cafe by the sea. so no one pried into her life, and no one knew the secrets she carried from the life she had left behind. 2 months passed, and with each passing day, Lydia felt herself becoming more connected to her new surroundings. So the beach, with its rhythmic waves and endless horizon, became her sanctuary. She found solace in the sound of the ocean, and on many nights, she would walk along the shore, letting the cool sea breeze wash over her as she reflected on the choices that had brought her to this point. But no matter how far she had come, there were still pieces of her old life that lingered like shadows in the corners of her mind. The letter from Todd had offered a measure of closure, but it hadn't erased the deep sense of loss and regret that she carried with her every day. She often wondered what he was doing now, how he was coping with the aftermath of their divorce. Had he moved on? Was he happy? These were questions she couldn't shake, even though she knew the answers might not bring her the peace she sought. And then there was Jake. She knew that now, but there was a part of her that couldn't fully let go of what they had shared, as fleeting and misguided as it had been. She hadn't heard from him since she left Delaney and company, and she doubted she ever would. Jake had always been the kind of man who moved on quickly, never lingering too long in one place or with one person. But every now and then, Lydia found herself wondering what might have happened if things had played out differently. As autumn turned to winter, Lydia became more introspective. The cold, bracing winds that swept across the beach matched the chill that had settled in her heart. While she had made progress in healing, there was still a sense of unfinished business, a feeling that her journey wasn't yet complete. She had fled from her past, but now it felt like it was time to face it head-on, to find some way to make peace with everything that had happened. So one evening, after her shift at the cafe, Lydia sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the waves crash against the shore. Setting sun cast a golden glow across the water, and the scene was beautiful, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had been thinking about Todd more frequently lately, and the weight of her unresolved feelings for him had grown heavier with each passing day. So it wasn't that she wanted to rekindle their marriage. She knew that chapter of her life was over. But there were things left unsaid, apologies unspoken, and forgiveness that she hadn't been able to give or receive. She needed closure, real closure, if she was ever going to move forward. The next morning, Lydia made a decision. She would reach out to Todd. She didn't know what she would say or how he would react, but she couldn't keep running from the past forever. So if she was ever going to truly heal, she needed to confront the pain she had caused and the pain she still felt. She sat at the small kitchen table in her cottage, pen and paper in hand, and began to write. Dear Todd, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and there are some things I need to say. I want to apologize. I know I've said it before, but I don't think I ever fully conveyed how deeply sorry I am for everything that happened. What I did was wrong, and I hurt you in ways that I can never undo. I betrayed your trust, and I broke the vows we made to each other. I know I can't ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know how much I regret my actions. When we were together, I don't think I ever truly appreciated everything you did for me. So you were always there, supporting me, loving me, even when things were difficult. I took that for granted, and it wasn't until I lost you that I realized how much I had thrown away. So I don't expect us to ever go back to what we had, but I hope in time we can both find some measure of peace. I've been living in a small town by the coast for the past few months, trying to figure out who I am without the weight of everything that happened. It's been hard, but it's also been healing. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and one thing has become clear to me. I need to make amends, not just for you but for myself. I need to close this chapter of my life, and I hope that we can do that together, even if it's just through this letter. I don't know if you'll want to respond, and I understand if you don't. But if you do, I'd like to hear how you're doing. I want to know that you're okay, that you found some happiness. You deserve that, Todd, more than anyone. You deserve peace. Take care of yourself, Lydia. After writing the letter, Lydia folded it neatly and slipped it into an envelope. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should actually send it. Would Todd even want to hear from her? Would this letter stir up old wounds that were better left alone? But deep down, she knew she needed to do this, not just for Todd, but for herself. So next morning, she walked to the post office and dropped the letter in the mailbox, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and relief as it disappeared into the slot. So now all she could do was wait. So days turned into weeks, and Lydia heard nothing. She hadn't expected a quick response if Todd chose to respond at all, but the silence gnawed at her, leaving her with a growing sense of uncertainty. Had she made the right decision in reaching out, or had she only complicated things further? To distract herself, Lydia threw herself into her work at the cafe and continued to explore the town. She had made a few friends among her co-workers, and they often invited her to join them for drinks or dinner after their shifts. It was a welcome distraction, and for a while, Lydia allowed herself to believe that she was moving forward, that she could leave the past behind. But one cold December afternoon, as she was preparing to close the cafe for the evening, Lydia received a call that would change everything. That a familiar voice said on the other end of the line. It was Todd. Her heart raced as she gripped the phone, unsure of what to say. Todd? Is that really you? Yeah, it's me, he replied, his voice calm but distant. I got your letter. Lydia swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions. I didn't know if you'd respond. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Todd finally spoke. I wasn't sure if I would either. But after reading it well, I think it's time we talked. Lydia sat down at one of the cafe tables, her hands trembling slightly. I agree, she said quietly. I've been thinking about everything about us, so much lately. I know I hurt you, Todd, and I'm so sorry. You did hurt me, Todd said, his voice steady. But I've had a lot of time to think, too. I've moved on, Lydia. Not completely, but I'm getting there. And I think it's time we both find some closure. Lydia felt a lump form in her throat. How are you? I've been wondering. Are you okay? And I've been working on rebuilding my life. Oh, it hasn't been easy, but I'm getting there. Lydia felt a wave of relief wash over her. So I'm glad to hear that, she said. I've been worried about you. I know you have, Todd said, but I want you to know something, Lydia. I don't hate you. I never did. I was angry and I was hurt, but I never hated you. I've let go of a lot of that anger. It took time, but I've come to terms with it. Lydia wiped away a tear that had begun to form in the corner of her eye. Thank you for saying that. So it means more to me than you know. There was another long pause before Todd spoke again. You asked in your letter if I'm happy. I don't know if I'm fully there yet, but I'm on the way. I've been seeing someone for a few months now. She's great, and it's different from what we had, but I think it's good for me. Lydia's heart ached at the thought of Todd with someone else, but she knew she had no right to feel that way. She had been the one to destroy their marriage, and if Todd had found happiness with someone else, she could only be happy for him. I'm really glad to hear that, she said, her voice soft. You deserve to be happy. And what about you? Todd asked. Are you okay? Lydia hesitated for a moment before answering. I think I'm getting there. I've been living in this small town for a while now, trying to figure things out. So it's been hard, but it's been good for me. I needed to get away from everything, to clear my head. I get that, Todd said. Sometimes getting away is the only way to heal. They talked for a while longer, exchanging updates on their lives and sharing memories of the years they had spent together. So it was bittersweet, but there was a sense of finality to it, a closing of the door on a chapter that had once been their whole world. As the conversation began to wind down, Todd spoke once more. Lydia, I'm glad you reached out. I think so too, she replied. I'm sorry it took me so long. It's okay, Todd said. We both needed time, but I'm glad we could have this conversation. I think it's time we both move on. Yeah, Lydia agreed. Her voice heavy with emotion. I think you're right. They said their goodbyes, and as Lydia hung up the phone, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from getting everything you want, but the kind that comes from accepting what you can't change. She and Todd were over, and that was okay. They had shared a life together, and while it hadn't ended the way either of them had expected, they had both grown from the experience. For the first time in a long time, Lydia felt like she could finally let go. As the new year approached, Lydia found herself looking forward to the future with a renewed sense of hope. The conversation with Todd had given her the closure she needed, and she was ready to move on with her life. She had spent so much time dwelling on the past, but now she felt like she could finally start building a new life for herself. The town that had once been a refuge from her old life had become her home. She had made friends, found a sense of purpose in her work, and, most importantly, she had found a sense of peace within herself. So one evening, after a long walk along the beach, Lydia returned to her cottage and sat down at her kitchen table. She opened her journal, the one she had been keeping since she first arrived in the town, and began to write. January 1st today feels like the start of something new. I've spent so much time running from my past, but I think I'm finally ready to stop. I've made peace with what happened, with Todd, with Jake, with myself. I'm not the same person I was when I left my old life behind, and that's okay. I'm stronger now, I'm wiser. This town has become my sanctuary, my place to heal. I don't know if I'll stay here forever, but for now, it feels right. I've made a home here, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to face it, whatever it may bring. Lydia closed her journal and smiled. The past was behind her, and the future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare her. That excited her. Lydia awoke early that morning, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filling the room. So the rhythmic noise, once a constant reminder of the solitude she sought, now brought her a deep sense of peace. The sunlight filtered through the curtains. She stretched out in bed, feeling the warmth of the morning settle into her bones. It had been a year since she had first come to this coastal town, and so much had changed. So the cafe job, which had initially been just a temporary way to occupy her time, had evolved into something she genuinely enjoyed. To the people, the routine, and the simplicity of it all grounded her. The weight of her past still lingered at times, but it was lighter now, no longer suffocating her. And after her conversation with Todd, she had finally begun to let go of the guilt and pain she had carried for so long. The day stretched out before her with no obligations or pressing concerns, and Lydia decided to spend it enjoying the quiet life she had built. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on the small porch of her cottage, watching the ocean glisten in the early morning sun. The salty air filled her lungs, reminding her of how far she had come, both literally and figuratively, from the woman she had been when she first arrived here. As she sipped her tea, she thought about the letter she had received from Todd several months ago. He had followed up their phone conversation with a handwritten note, offering one final message of goodwill and closure. It was short and to the point, but it brought Lydia a deep sense of comfort. Lydia, I wanted to say thank you for our conversation. It meant a lot to me, and I think it was something we both needed. I'm glad we were able to talk things through and find some peace with everything that happened. I don't think either of us expected our lives to turn out the way they did, but I believe that we're both stronger because of it. I've moved on, and I hope you're finding the happiness and peace you deserve. You'll always be an important part of my life, and I'll always wish the best for you. Take care of yourself, Todd. Lydia had read that letter countless times since she received it, and each time it left her feeling more at peace with the choices she had made. The hurt and betrayal that had once consumed her no longer defined her. She had learned to forgive herself, and in doing so, she had found a way to move forward. The friendships she had built in the town had been another source of healing. Her co-workers at the cafe had become more than just acquaintances. They were friends, people who cared about her and didn't judge her for the mistakes she had made. There was Emma, the cafe manager, who had taken Lydia under her wing when she first started. She was warm, funny, and full of life, always quick to offer a kind word or a laugh. Then there was Peter, one of the regulars who often came in for coffee and stayed to chat. He was a retired fisherman, with a gruff exterior but a heart of gold. Lydia enjoyed their conversations, and over time, they had become close. It was through these friendships that Lydia began to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. The town had embraced her, and for the first time since leaving her old life behind, she felt like she was truly part of something again. As she finished her tea, she heard the faint sound of her phone vibrating on the table inside. She set her cup down and went inside to check the message. It was from Emma. Emma, good morning. So are you up for a little adventure today? Lydia smiled. Emma was always coming up with Scone's plans, and Lydia had learned to embrace her friend's free-spirited nature. She quickly typed out a reply. Lydia, absolutely. What do you have in mind? The response came almost immediately. Emma, meet me at the pier in 30 minutes. Trust me, it's going to be fun. Lydia quickly dressed in a pair of jeans and a light sweater, slipping on her shoes as she grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The walk to the pier was short, and as she approached, she saw Emma waving excitedly from a small boat tied to the dock. What are you up to, Emma? Lydia called out, laughing as she made her way down to the boat. We're going on a little boat trip, Emma announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. There's this beautiful spot a few miles down the coast that I've been dying to show you. You'll love it. Lydia hesitated for a moment, but the infectious enthusiasm in Emma's voice was hard to resist. Okay, she said, smiling. Let's do it. The boat ride was peaceful, the wind gently tugging at Lydia's hair as they made their way down the coast. The water was calm, and the sun cast a warm glow over the ocean. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lydia felt truly content, as if the weight of the past had finally lifted from her shoulders. After about an hour, Emma guided the boat into a small cove surrounded by rocky cliffs. The water here was a stunning shade of turquoise, and the beach was secluded, untouched by the outside world. Isn't it beautiful? Emma asked as she dropped anchor and helped Lydia out of the boat. It's incredible, Lydia breathed. Find this place. Peter showed it to me years ago, Emma said, smiling. He used to fish here when he was younger. Not many people know about it, which is why I love coming here. It feels like our own little secret. The two women spent the afternoon exploring the beach, collecting seashells, and wading in the water. Lydia couldn't remember the last time she had felt so free, so unburdened by the past. The sound of Emma's laughter echoed off the cliffs as they joked and chatted. And for a few hours, Lydia let herself fully embrace the moment. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the water, Emma turned to Lydia with a thoughtful expression. "You know," Emma said, her voice softening, "you've changed a lot since you first came here." Lydia smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I feel different," she admitted. "When I first arrived, I was so lost. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what I wanted. But being here, in this town, with you and Peter and everyone else, it's helped me heal. I don't feel like I'm running away from my past anymore." Emma nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "I could tell you were carrying a lot of pain when you first came, but you've done the hard work. You've faced it, and you've grown from it. That's not an easy thing to do." Lydia felt a lump form in her throat as she considered Emma's words. "I'm still figuring things out," she said, her voice quiet. "But I think I'm finally ready to move on." "I'm proud of you," Emma said, wrapping an arm around Lydia's shoulders. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Lydia blinked back tears, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Emma," she whispered. "I don't think I could have done it without you." Emma smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "You're welcome, but don't sell yourself short. You've done this. You've rebuilt your life." As they sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lydia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had come to this town looking for a fresh start, and while the road had been rocky at times, she had found exactly what she needed. She had found herself. In the days that followed, Lydia began to feel a growing sense of purpose. She had come to terms with her past, found closure with Todd, and built a new life for herself. But now she felt like it was time for the next chapter. One afternoon, while sitting at the cafe during a slow shift, Lydia found herself scrolling through job listings on her phone. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, but a job posting for a community outreach coordinator at a nearby nonprofit caught her eye. The position involved working with local communities to organize events, fundraisers, and outreach programs for families in need. So it was a far cry from the corporate world she had once inhabited, but something about it intrigued her. She clicked on the listing and read through the job description, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. The idea of helping others, of giving back to the community that had welcomed her with open arms, resonated deeply with her. Lydia thought about it for a few days before deciding to apply. She had nothing to lose, and even if she didn't get the job, the process of putting herself out there again felt like an important step in moving forward. A week later, she received a call from the nonprofit's director, inviting her in for an interview. Lydia was nervous but excited as she prepared for the meeting. On a job interview. The interview went well, and Lydia left feeling hopeful. The director had been warm and enthusiastic, and they had connected over their shared passion for helping others. As she walked back to her car, Lydia realized that she hadn't felt this excited about something in a long time. 2 days later, she received the call she had been hoping for. She got the job. Lydia threw herself into her new role with a sense of purpose and passion that she hadn't felt in years. The work was challenging at times, but it was also deeply rewarding. She spent her days organizing community events, coordinating volunteer efforts, and working with families in need. Every day felt like an opportunity to make a difference, and Lydia loved the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself. Her friendships with Emma and Peter grew stronger, and she found herself becoming more involved in the town's social life. She attended local festivals, joined a book club, and even started volunteering at the local animal shelter on the weekends. The once isolated life she had led in the corporate world now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a vibrant and fulfilling community that she was proud to be a part of. As the months passed, Lydia's new life began to feel more and more like home. She still thought about Todd from time to time, but the pain of their separation had faded into a quiet understanding. They had both moved on, and while they would always share a history, Lydia knew that her future no longer revolved around him. She had her own path to follow now. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraising event, Lydia sat on the porch of her cottage, reflecting on how far she had come. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, found a new sense of purpose, and discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. She thought back to the woman she had been a year ago, the woman who had run away from her past, broken and lost. That woman felt like a stranger now. Lydia had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and using those lessons to shape a better future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the water, Lydia smiled to herself. So the journey hadn't been easy, but she had made it through. She had found peace, she had found purpose, and most importantly, she had found herself. And for the first time in a long time, Lydia felt truly happy. Several more months passed, and Lydia's life continued to flourish. Her work at the nonprofit was thriving, and the relationships she had built in the town deepened. She had become an integral part of the community, and it felt like the small coastal town was no longer just a refuge, it was home. One morning, as Lydia was preparing for a meeting at work, she received a call from Peter. "Lydia," Peter said, his voice gruff but warm, "I've been thinking you've done a lot for this town. You've helped a lot of people, myself included." Lydia laughed softly. "I'm just doing my job, Peter. You've done more for this town than I ever could." Well, Peter continued, "I've got something I want to ask you. How do you feel about running for the town council?" Lydia blinked in surprise. "What, me? Peter, I don't know anything about politics." "Neither do half the people on that council," Peter said with a chuckle. "But you've got heart, Lydia. You care about this town, and you've got ideas that could really make a difference." "We need someone like you," Lydia hesitated, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The idea of running for town council had never crossed her mind, but the thought of being able to make an even bigger impact on the community intrigued her. "I don't know, Peter," she said slowly. "I'd have to think about it. Take your time," Peter said, "but just know that if you run, I'll be there to support you every step of the way." After hanging up the phone, Lydia sat down at her kitchen table, her mind racing with possibilities. The idea of running for town council was daunting, but it was also exciting. She had spent so much of her life feeling powerless, but now she had the opportunity to make a real difference, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to care about. Over the next few days, Lydia thought long and hard about Peter's suggestion. She talked it over with Emma, who was immediately supportive, and she spent time considering what it would mean for her life. It would be a new challenge, a new chapter, but Lydia realized she was ready for it. A week later, she called Peter back. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "Let's do this." So the campaign for town council was both exhilarating and exhausting. Lydia had never been one for public speaking or politics, but she found herself energized by the process. She met with local business owners, attended community meetings, and listened to the concerns of the townspeople. So the more she got involved, the more she realized how much she cared about the future of the town. And the town responded. People were drawn to Lydia's authenticity, her genuine desire to help, and her willingness to listen. She wasn't a politician. She was one of them, someone who understood the challenges they faced and wanted to make things better. On election night, Lydia stood nervously with Emma and Peter at the community center, waiting for the results. So her heart raced as the votes were tallied, and when her name was announced as the winner, she could hardly believe it. "You did it," Emma cried, throwing her arms around Lydia in a tight hug. Peter grinned, clapping her on the back. "I knew you could do it." Lydia felt a surge of emotion as she looked around at the people who had supported her throughout her journey. She had come to this town looking for a fresh start, and now she had not only found it, she had built a life here. A life that mattered. As she stood on the small stage to give her victory speech, Lydia took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. The faces of the townspeople, her friends, her new family, smiled back at her, and in that moment, Lydia knew that she had finally found her place in the world. "I want to thank all of you for believing in me," Lydia said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This town has given me so much, and I'm honored to be able to give back. Together, we're going to make this community even stronger. This is just the beginning." So the crowd erupted into applause, and as Lydia stepped off the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never known before. So the journey had been long, and the road had been difficult, but she had found her way. And for the first time in her life, Lydia knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Lydia stood on the porch of her small seaside cottage, she breathed in the crisp, salty air, feeling the familiar comfort of the ocean breeze against her skin. The rhythmic crash of the waves, once a distant sound that underscored her isolation, now signified peace and belonging. The journey that had brought her here had been long and tumultuous, filled with loss, regret, healing, and rediscovery. But now, in this moment, Lydia finally felt at home, not just in the town she had come to love, but within herself. It had been almost 2 years since she left her old life behind, and everything had changed. For running for town council had been an unexpected adventure, and winning the election had marked a pivotal turning point in her life. The work was challenging, often more so than anything she had faced before, but Lydia thrived in her new role. She had learned to balance the demands of the position with her personal life, and for the first time, she felt like she was making a real difference, not just for herself, but for others as well. The town had rallied around her during her campaign, and that support only grew after she took office. She became a voice for the people, advocating for improvements in local infrastructure, organizing community events, and ensuring that the town's most vulnerable were cared for. Her work at the nonprofit had seamlessly merged with her responsibilities as a councilwoman, and Lydia found herself more fulfilled than ever.